Chapter 861 Four's Dream. Upon hearing the middle-aged man's shout and seeing his warped expression, Hazel's eyes, which were filled with rage and hatred, gradually froze before melting into a confused and lost look. It wasn't only her. Macht and Rihanna, as well as Dwayne Dantes, fell silent. No one spoke for a moment. Even Fours, who had concealed herself, also lost the sense of excitement she originally had, no longer having that strong sense of justice. After more than 10 seconds, Macht stopped looking at his assailant and turned his head to say to his bodyguards,
"One of you stay here. Watch the scene and the suspect. Wait for the police."
Having said that, he paused and said to his valet,
"Get a few reporters to cover this matter."
After preliminarily dealing with the matter, this House of Commons Member of Parliament surveyed the area and discovered that several passers-by were attempting to gather over to check on what was happening. He then looked at Dwayne Dantes and apologized with a smile.
"My apologies for putting you in such danger. I never expected the matter to develop this way. We did consider the actual situation of similar factory owners and coal suppliers, and we had provided them some assistance and interim measures. Who knew?
Coming up with a bill is something, but the actual implementation is an entirely different matter. When atmospheric pollution becomes abnormally pressing, and the various parties exert immense stress, it's no surprise that a cookie-cutter solution is employed. Klein sighed and said with a self-deprecating laugh,
"There's no need to keep my feelings into consideration. I've been in even more dangerous situations in the past."
On the surface, it appeared as though he was referring to his encounters when doing business in the southern continent's West Balaam. In fact, he had recalled Megose, who was pregnant with an evil god's spawn, the terrifying meteor that had crashed down from the sky, Cynthia, who wanted to bear a child for Admiral Amerius, and the Rose School of Thought angel and numinous episcopate monster who had collapsed the mountain outside Bam. Compared to these, what had happened here was like a drizzle. He didn't even need to consider his own safety, since there was Geo, Miss Magician, and Hazel. He didn't even take action besides dodging normally like any experienced adventurer would do. His focus was on whether this would result in a storm. Macht sighed and nodded.
"I can tell that you're very calm. I once doubted your experiences, but now I'm convinced. All right, Dwayne, let's return home separately. Leave the rest to the police. If there's a need to take a statement, they will do it at your residence."
Klein nodded and said to Macht and family,
"Be safe."
Macht nodded seriously and sighed once again.
Backlund's social season has just begun, and this happened. Cherish the peace we have now.
Backlund's social season is marked by the return of the House of Lords members of Parliament. It seems to have begun since last weekend. And this week, 2 cases have happened consecutively: the harm dealt to Baron Sindris and the assault on Member of Parliament Macht. As he thought, Klein didn't stay put. He brought Richardson, who clearly looked a little shaken, and walked towards his carriage. When he got into it, he watched the scenery fly backward as he sighed and half closed his eyes. He was presently unable to determine if the assault hadn't involved beyond her powers, as everything that had happened could be done by ordinary people. As for the middle-aged man, he had sufficient reason to do so. This didn't need deliberate fabricating, as Klein believed that in Backlund, at present, there were more than one former factory owner or employer that had lost their livelihood because of similar developments. The only thing that felt questionable was that Macht was the target. Although the House of Commons were the supporters, advocates of the environmental measures, often making relevant speeches and are interviewed by the papers, he wasn't the most obvious target during the passing of the bill. In comparison, there was a higher chance that members of the National Atmospheric Pollution Council were picked as targets for revenge. Klein leaned on the carriage wall as he slowly opened his eyes, seeing that it was already dark and cloudy with rain already pattering down. Once again, he realized how the maelstrom, hidden beneath the seemingly calm Backlund surface, was intensifying. Reining in his thoughts, Klein raised his left palm and tapped his pocket. In it was what he believed to be Frankly's reply and some unknown mushrooms. Klein really yearned to return home to head above the gray fog and use the newly received mushrooms to communicate with creeping hunger, doing so to regain the use of the sealed artifact. With the storm already brewing, he believed that there was a need for him to quickly be returned back to his optimal combat strength. And in this aspect, creeping hunger was essential. Unfortunately, he had 2 Beyonder bodyguards following him, so it was best if he didn't head above the gray fog for the time being. Klein finally sighed inwardly.
I clearly don't need any protection, but I spent a few £100 to hire 2 people to restrict my actions. How helpless I am as a tycoon.
As he raised the cup of black tea that had just been prepared by Richardson, he took a sip as his facial muscles tensed up before relaxing. Klein looked down and discovered that there had been twice the number of lemon slices in his black tea than usual. He glanced at Richardson in an unnoticeable manner, and he saw that his valet was in a daze, as though he was still lost in the horror of the assault. Klein commented inwardly,
As cowardly as usual.
As he placed the porcelain cup on the table. Late at night, 39 Bokeland Street, Member of Parliament Mock's house. Hazel sat before her dressing table, looking at the gray rat sitting on a powder box. After a long silence, she said,
Was my father wrong? The matter he pushed for is clearly a good thing.
The rat said perfunctorily,
There is nothing that is beneficial to everyone. There will always be those who benefit and those who suffer from it. At such times, a relevant bill or plan requires thought, compensation, and aid. If your father had done them, the problem isn't his. Conversely, it also means he's cold and ruthless.
Hazel recalled for a few seconds and relaxed her expression.
During dinner, I sensed that there was something very valuable hidden inside the cupboard in the pantry, but when I later got an opportunity to open it, there was nothing.
The rat was taken aback, as it said in thought,
Perhaps that was Dwayne Dantes' bodyguard. He was recently embroiled in a suicide case, and it's said that it involves Baron Sindris. Hiring a bodyguard to protect him in secret is normal. The bodyguard inside the cupboard might also possess supernatural powers, carrying mystical items with them. That's why you were able to sense it.
Hazel nodded gently and accepted the explanation before subconsciously muttering to herself,
I wonder what kinds of supernatural powers those bodyguards have.
After saying that, she swept the gray rat with a puzzled look.
How do you know Dwayne Dantes was embroiled in a troublesome case?
The rat squeaked.
My present state is very suitable for me to eavesdrop into the conversations of others.
As it spoke, it looked in the direction of 160 Bokeland Street, the glint in its eyes shimmering. Based on the sleeping rotation, Fours was asleep as she felt herself float to an ancient and majestic castle. In it were all kinds of Beyonder ingredients and mystical items. There were even 2 blurry tarot cards. However, she didn't take any of them away, as they were sealed by an invisible force field. Force looked around in an attempt to find the means to remove the seal. Finally, she saw a complicated symbol drawn at the top of the dome. It was a symbol formed from fate and concealment. Fours immediately came to a realization when she snapped awake.
If I find an item engraved with this symbol, I'll be able to unseal some treasure.
She discovered that she had curled into a ball on the carpet in the room. She had a thin silk blanket covering her. She and Shio didn't dare sleep in the reclining chair, afraid that Dwayne Dantes, who often sat in it, would notice something different. Rubbing the edges of her brows, Fours sat up and saw Shio having her back to the wall of the master bedroom. She was seriously listening for any stirrings. As Fours walked to Shio, she said with a frown,
I feel that there is some secret hidden here. I had a strange dream, dreaming of an exaggerated treasure trove and a complicated symbol.
As an astrologer, she instinctively believed that there was a problem with her dream. Noticing the serious look on Fours' face, Shio suppressed her words of doubt and said, after some thought,
Perhaps there really is some sort of secret. I once heard a proverb regarding the mysterious world. It goes, when a Beyonder element is discovered somewhere, there must be a second one.
Fours nodded gently before laughing.
Ignoring the butler, who we can't tell if he possesses Beyonder powers or not, that Miss Hazel is someone with a Beyonder element. Around her, or should I say that this street, likely has a second one. However, it has nothing to do with us. We will receive our remuneration tomorrow evening and terminate this bodyguard mission. We will leave this place. The most pitiful of all is Dwayne Dantes. He's innocent and ordinary, but he ends up involved with troublesome matters and Beyonder elements.
Having said that, Forrest looked and CO and joked,
Quickly wish him that the goddess would watch over him. I'm a believer of the god of steam and machinery. I won't be able to do so.
CO seriously considered for 2 seconds before drawing a crimson moon on her chest, piously muttering,
May the goddess bless Mr. Dwayne Dantes.
Forrest was snapped out of her reverie as she covered her mouth and yawned.
I'll head out to patrol the building. It's your turn to sleep after another 15 minutes.
Shio was clearly more awake than Forrest.
All right.
Forrest immediately headed for the door and pressed on the wall with her outstretched hand, arriving at the corridor. She was just about to walk to the staircase when she sensed that there was a slight stir coming from the room of Dwayne Dantes's valet. Forrest's eyes darted slightly as she cautiously headed over. She opened a tiny door in the wall and peeped in. She then saw Richardson jumping a crazy dance that had a tinge of mystery.
A spirit dance? Doesn't this valet believe in the Evernight goddess? He's secretly worshipping death?
Forrest frowned as she watched Richardson finish his spirit dance, softly praying for Death's protection to help him avoid all kinds of danger. After everything came to an end, Forrest TSKED and shook her head. She silently said to herself,
What a pitiful man, Mr. Dantes.
Chapter 862, Kind Warning. After returning to the room with the balcony, Forrest looked at CO, who had her back against the wall, and whispered,
Guess what I saw? That male servant, Dantes' valet, is actually a believer of death. He was dancing a spirit dance and praying.
Dio widened her eyes before relaxing her expression.
When it comes to Mr. Dantes, that's the least of his concerns. Yeah, that valet named Richardson is clearly of Southern Continent heritage. Perhaps he was born there, so it's not surprising that he worships death.
Forrest replied with a smile.
I know. I just find it interesting. Aren't there a little too many people with secrets around Dwayne Dantes? I won't be surprised if I were to discover one day that all the living beings in this building except him, including the housekeeper, maids, gardeners, carriage drivers, earthworms, bugs, and rats, are related to mystery and beyonders. I would be able to easily accept that reality.
Shio rolled her eyes.
If that were the case, Mr. Dwayne Dantes definitely wouldn't be a simple person. Having beyonders and supernatural creatures around him means that he might be the spawn of an evil god or a grounded angel.
Without waiting for Forrest to expand the scope of the conversation, Zio asked,
Didn't you say that you had a strange dream involving treasure? Why aren't you curious or considering what it symbolizes, that perhaps it might actually exist?
Forrest chuckled.
Such a dream often implies trouble and danger. I'll consider it again if I have a chance of encountering that symbol.
Although she said that, her true thoughts were,
There's quite a bit of a problem with that dream. Who knows if there's a ploy behind it? I'll consult Mr. Hanged Man, Ma'am Hermit, and Mr. World at the tarot gathering next week before deciding what to do. They are experienced and powerful beyonders. Perhaps they have had similar experiences.
You've matured.
Zio nodded, and exerting strength in her back, she bounced off the wall and walked to the spot where Forrest had been sleeping before.
Mature?
Forrest scoffed and leaned in towards her friend. She straightened her back and looked down at her friend's hair. Without waiting for CO to become enraged, she sighed.
You're the one who matured. You still remember this time last year? You did things based on instinct, arbitrating with your fist. From time to time, you would commit mistakes without realizing it and become lost. You're much better now.
Zio was stunned as she lay down and covered herself with the thin silk blanket. With her back facing Fours, she grumbled.
The main reason why I got lost was because of you being a burden by my side.
Fours chortled and nodded in thought.
That's a characteristic of an apprentice. It has nothing to do with me. Get it?
Seeing Shio on the floor, she walked to the wall adjacent to the master bedroom and seriously started being a bodyguard. As the night slowly passed, the sky gradually lit up. Klein got up to have breakfast and received visits from 2 batches of policemen and a batch of reporters. They were here for further investigations regarding Quaron's suicide case, while another was to obtain more details regarding Member of Parliament Mock's assault. With Walter's help, Dwayne Dantes met them and quickly handled the matters. In the afternoon, Mock suddenly visited and urged Klein,
Join me at the club for a game of tennis.
He was a member of a few clubs, but there was only one club that overlapped with Dwayne Dantes, East Balaam Military Veterans Mess.
This is to confirm the arms deal?
Klein managed to read between the lines and immediately got Richardson to get his coat, top hat, and cane. He rode on his carriage and headed to the sandy yellow unique building at Hillston Borough with a member of Parliament. They entered the club and used the same room as before. Klein once again met the long-faced Army colonel from the Ministry of Defense, Calvin. After habitually exchanging pleasantries for a few minutes, Calvin finally focused on the main topic at hand. He looked at Dwayne Dantes and said with a chuckle,
I heard from Mocked that you can have 20,000 pounds available?
Although it will make me tight on funds, it's true that I can.
Klein replied with a smile. Calvin nodded in satisfaction and said after some pondering,
There won't be any need for 20,000 pounds for now. The batch of firearms, explosives, and small number of cannons reserved for you is in a particular warehouse in East Balaam. There's not that much, enough to equip about 3,000 to 4,000 people. Based on the price of decommissioning them, it will cost 10,000 pounds at most. Of course, you will have to give me 15,000 pounds.
He didn't mince his words in any way, as though this was common in the Lowen military.
No problem.
Klein said and nodded calmly. Calvin immediately chuckled.
Excellent. Mocked has a keen eye for people. A person who wants to do such business absolutely mustn't be stingy. That batch of firearms is worth at least 20,000 pounds in West Balaam. If you can find a suitable buyer and fully showcase your experience in the area, it's entirely possible to sell them for 30,000 pounds or even more. By the way, the transportation fees and escort fees will be borne by you. We will only send 2 or 3 personnel to assist you.
As expected, there will be monitors.
Klein listened in silence, believing that it was time that he urged Admiral of Stars and Danitz to quickly provide him with information on West Balaam. He pondered for a moment and said,
Roughly, when will it begin?
That batch of firearms will take another 2 weeks before being placed in the corresponding warehouse. When it happens after that period is up to you. You don't have to pay it in full at once. You can first pay 8,000 to 10,000 pounds and pay the rest when everything is settled.
Calvin wore an expression as though things were highly negotiable.
2 weeks later. That will be closer to the end of the month. I'll definitely have to wait until the party of the Snake of Fate's birth before leaving. I'm still waiting for his placenta blood.
Klein's thoughts raced as he said,
I'll need to carry out some preparatory work. I'll probably head to the southern continent in early July.
Calvin Mocked exchanged looks with Mocked and gently rubbed his palms.
No problem.
Outside the East Balaam Military Veterans Mess, Shio and Fours hid themselves on the roof of a nearby building, monitoring the people that were coming and going. Shio knew that there were many Beyonders in the club, so she didn't dare get Fours to sneak her in to provide protection to Dwayne Dantes at a close distance. All they did was wait outside.
Thankfully, this is Backland. Even though there's no smog this season, there will be no lack of clouds. The sun wouldn't be too strong, otherwise my skin would definitely turn red.
Fours mumbled as she hid herself in the shadows. Gio was about to say something when she saw a carriage drive into the back door of the club. It was entirely brown in color and had a trademark coat of arms. It was made of flowers and rings.
Viscount Stratford's carriage.
Zio silently mumbled as she hurriedly widened her eyes and focused. She then saw a familiar figure who was a stranger to her get off the carriage. Surrounded by bodyguards, the figure entered the East Belém military veterans' mess.
What's wrong?
Forrest noticed her friend's abnormality. Zio didn't conceal the matter, as she frankly said,
I saw Viscount Stratford. He also came to this club.
That captain of the Royal Guards?
Forrest asked in surprise.
Yeah.
Zio nodded heavily. Forrest turned agape, hoping to say something, but she was at a loss as to what to say. All she could do was look around, pretending to monitor for anything that was amiss. After a while, she saw Duane Dantes walk out. 160 Beauclerk Street received another guest in the afternoon. This time, it was the largest shareholder of the coin company, Ma'am Mary.
I'm very sorry that my request embroiled you in such trouble. I never expected Baron Sindris to do something like that. Poor Quaron. He was planning on bringing his family to Winter County for the summer.
Mary Schott apologized with hints of anger. Klein replied calmly,
I agree with your views on Quaron. He was really unfortunate. However, this matter probably wasn't done by Baron Sindris. It might be a trap that's targeting him.
Mary nodded heavily.
I've heard of the theory. It's said that the police department is planning to hire a skilled forensic pathologist to dissect the corpse to search for any missing clues.
Her final sentence was automatically replaced by Klein, as the police department is planning to hire a skilled spirit medium from the Church of Evernight to examine the corpse to search for any missing clues.
I wonder what will be discovered.
Klein raised his right hand and tapped his chest 4 times in a clockwise fashion.
May the goddess give Quaron peace, and that the true murderer behind his death will suffer punishment.
Mary responded in the same way before saying,
In order to prevent you from being affected by this matter, I plan on purchasing the shares from you ahead of time. I'll add an additional £1,000 above the highest price to date. You don't have to worry about my funds. I've recently been busy borrowing money from the banks.
Klein sighed and replied,
I'm very grateful for your kind intentions, but any advance transferring of the shares will need to be done with the church. I've already donated it to them. I plan on using the income I receive to establish a bursary foundation that targets the poor.
This was the first time Mary was hearing of such news. She was momentarily stunned and speechless. After 10 seconds, she exhaled and said,
Your character, generosity, and wisdom truly impresses me.
As she said that, she looked at Duane Dantes with an additional look of admiration. Klein humbly diverted the compliment to the goddess before pausing. He then asked with a stern expression,
Ma'am Mary, I have a question that I hope you can answer. When you decided to clash with Baron Sindris to protect your control over the coin company, was it purely by your own will or a result of persuasion by others?
Mary frowned and frankly replied,
All the persuasion that was directed at me was to ask me to give up.
Klein immediately fell silent as he didn't discuss the matter further. He casually mentioned Member of Parliament Macht's assault before sending the lady out of 160 Beauclerk Street. After dinner, Walter came to the half-opened room with the balcony and said to his employer on the reclining chair,
Sir, the 2 bounty hunters have been dismissed. It cost a total of £300 for 3 days, excluding the food provided.
They're finally gone.
Klein immediately relaxed as he nodded, acknowledging his butler's reply. Following that, he eagerly entered the master bedroom, planning on taking out the mushrooms sent to him from Frank Lee and bringing them up above the gray fog to communicate with creeping hunger. When he came to the desk with the hidden mushrooms, he saw a letter held down by an ink bottle. Klein picked it up in puzzlement and tore it open. He quickly scanned it as his expression turned odd.
Dear Mr. Dantes, we are the bodyguards you hired. In the past few days, we discovered certain matters that we feel obligated to inform you. Therefore, we entered your bedroom to leave this letter while you were having dinner.
Chapter 863, Charity Party. Your butler might be researching black magic. Your valet is secretly worshipping death. Someone among your neighbors has supernatural powers. The street where you live might have certain secrets that cause people to have strange dreams. You should understand some of the terms mentioned. We won't provide a further explanation. May the goddess bless you." Klein looked at the letter in his hand as he was momentarily unsure whether to laugh or cry. After a few seconds, he couldn't help but give a self-deprecating laugh.
Just from the contents of this letter, I'm really quite pitiful. And the matters described don't seem to be problematic in any way.
As he shook his head with a smile, Klein held a letter in one hand and suddenly shook it to the side. Scarlet flames surged and devoured the piece of paper. "Ta," as Klein mumbled.
Regardless, Miss Zio and Miss Magician are rather kind people. The only problem is that what they mentioned are things I already know. In fact, I'm more aware of the reasons than they are.
He found the mushrooms he had hidden. There were a total of 4 breeds of mushrooms. One was 3 dried products that could react with water and fish. The second was a new breed with golden caps as they emitted the smell of flour. The third was white with specks of black spots. They were swollen and puffy, as though a liquid was flowing within them as they exuded the smell of milk. The fourth had strange gills running down its 2 sides. Their surface was filled with dense and soft scales. Klein swept his gaze at these mushrooms and took out a gold coin. He caught it after flicking it. After confirming the results, he took off the ordinary glove he previously wore. With his bare skin, he grabbed the 3 new mushrooms to test various scenarios that Frank Lee hadn't mentioned. They felt normal to the touch, and there weren't any changes to the mushrooms. Klein heaved a sigh of relief, no longer afraid that the level of danger they possessed had exceeded his capability. He was previously afraid that these mushrooms would immediately produce roots upon contact with items of flesh and blood, devouring whatever was in its path to grow before dispersing its spores. Perhaps it's the relatively strong light from the gas wall lamps, or it might be as a result of plucking them, which causes these mushrooms to lose most of their living characteristics. They will be revived only under special conditions, such as being in the stomach of a living creature. With the intention to figure out the truth, he drew all the curtains to the master bedroom and extinguished all the wall lamps. Then he picked up the new mushrooms with his bare hand and determined that there wasn't anything abnormal about them, as they hadn't fed on his body. After doing this, Klein lit the wall lamps again and set up a ritual, sacrificing the mushrooms above the gray fog. Sitting in the fool's seat, he wasn't in a rush to summon creeping hunger. He first summoned a metal bottle that had his blood inside to the long bronze table. Right on the heels of that, he poured a drop of blood on the table and piled the 3 new breeds of mushrooms onto it. In just a second, the mushrooms suddenly softened at the parts where they made contact with the blood. They squirmed as they enveloped the blood. Whatever they made contact with grew a dense array of needle-like hair. The corners of Klein's lips twitched when he saw that. He directly adjusted some of the powers of the mysterious space above the gray fog, suppressing all the mushrooms. Then, he sent the drop of blood back into the metal bottle and closed the lid. He had roughly understood the characteristics of the mushrooms. Without wasting any time, he summoned creeping hunger from the junk pile. Holding the thin, human-skin glove, Klein placed it on the table and removed the seal around the mushrooms. Then, he saw the creeping hunger support itself with its 5 fingers before standing up with great difficulty. It began retreating rapidly like it was playing a piano.
So you do know fear?
Klein revealed a genial smile. He pressed the glove down and gifted it with some of the powers of the mysterious space above the gray fog. Then he grabbed a mushroom with his other hand and brought it close to creeping hunger. The human-skinned glove struggled with all its might, but ultimately failed to escape his grasp as it clearly began trembling. Klein stopped moving the hand with the mushroom and chuckled.
Are you still going to randomly praise the true creator?
Creeping hunger continued struggling without giving a reply. Klein thought for a moment before he compromised.
I'll allow you to praise once a day. In the day or in the evening.
Creeping hunger's struggling weakened, but it didn't stop. Klein continued negotiating with an unperturbed expression.
Thrice a day. During breakfast, lunch, and dinner time, however, you will need to warn me ahead of time.
Creeping Hunger struggled twice before sprawling onto the desk, motionless. After another round of negotiations, Klein successfully reached an agreement with Creeping Hunger. However, eating daily was instinctual to the item. It was unable to be weakened much as a result of the negotiations. Therefore, he needed to wait for the sealing method provided by Isaac. At present, what Klein could do was bring Creeping Hunger around without it eating. However, he needed to come up with a meal within 24 hours.
How troublesome. Thankfully, after Creeping Hunger fused with Mr. A and the mushroom, its living characteristic has strengthened. Otherwise, there would be no way to make any negotiations with it.
Klein commented wistfully. Finally, he did a divination regarding the recent matters, and he received a conclusion that there wasn't too much danger. He also got confirmation that Quaron's suicide was a result of the influence of a Beyonder. After busying himself with all of that, he left the gray fog and returned to the real world and continued waiting for Mr. Isaac's reply. On Saturday evening, Klein, who wore a formal suit, arrived at St. Samuel Cathedral with Richardson on a carriage to participate in the charity party. After passing through the main entrance, he was led by a priest to a huge adjacent hall. There was a baldachin with the sacred emblem representing the Evernight goddess placed inside. High above were a few miniature crystal chandeliers that hung down. In front of it were thin and long candles, as well as overturned round metal lids used to store wax. At this moment, all of them had been lit, illuminating the hall with brightness. It had quite a holy feeling to it. Klein glanced over and saw a series of neatly arranged seats and guests who wore out of the ordinary attire. Among them, the women mainly wore two types of clothing. One was dresses that were either bright or dark colors, and they were bold and liberal in their dressing, allowing one to see the fair flesh at their bosoms or their shoulders. The other type wore pure and fresh colors and relatively conservative dressing. Even their collarbones could hardly be seen. Some of them even had theirs concealed. Based on what Klein knew, this was the difference between married and unmarried women in the Lowen Kingdom. As for widows and divorced, they could choose between the two. However, the former tended to choose darker colors. Aside from those, Klein also saw shimmering necklaces and exquisite earrings, as well as all kinds of valuable accessories. They were a lot more impressive than what the guests that attended the ball or banquet, which Mockton himself had hosted. After walking into the hall, Klein greeted the bishops, Mocked and others he knew, and exchanged pleasantries. At this moment, there was a sound from the door as many guests turned to look back, revealing their smiles as they walked over. When Klein looked over, his gaze first lit up before it froze. At the entrance to the hall, the most attractive one there was a girl with lustrous blonde hair that softly cascaded down her shoulders. Her beautiful eyes were green like emeralds. They appeared like the sea which hid a maelstrom within, making anyone who looked at her unable to move their gaze away. Her facial features were pretty, and she had an outstanding bearing. Her looks were nearly flawless, making the men and women present find it difficult to notice what kind of dress she was wearing, or the designer of her jewelry. However, Klein had swept his gaze to the necklace at her collarbone. A lustrous and perfect pearl was being embedded within the crevice between the intersection of her collarbone. It softened the lines at her neck, making her accentuate a clean and mesmerizing feel. Klein had met her before, and he knew her. She was none other than the Tarot Club's Miss Justice. Back when she used magic mirror divination, Klein had seen her before. Immediately, Klein moved his gaze away, without daring to take another look. This was an instinctive reaction of his, as he knew that Miss Justice was a Beyonder of the Spectator pathway. If he garnered her attention, it was very easy for her to read his true thoughts and secrets based on the changes in his expressions and body language. But his racing mind quickly forced him to turn his head back as he continued casting his gaze at Miss Justice. He discovered that him avoiding her had made it worse and more obvious.
How could a gentleman who liked all kinds of women not take a few more glances when encountering such an abnormally beautiful lady?
At the same time, Audrey sensed the abnormality of a particular man.
His sideburns are a little white. His looks and bearing aren't bad, making him appear profound. This is likely Mr. Dwayne Dantes, who donated more than £10,000 in an attempt to establish a bursary foundation for the poor. His reaction was a little odd, as though he was trying to hide something.
To Audrey, Dwayne Dantes' act of moving his gaze away was actually very normal. She had encountered many similar situations in the past. Some men would indeed subconsciously turn their heads away after seeing her, as though afraid that she would notice it, or that they would make eye contact, exposing their moment of being mesmerized. Therefore, what was odd wasn't that Dwayne Dantes had moved his gaze away. Instead, he had turned his gaze back again. In addition, Audrey felt that the greatest problem was that the gentleman's emotions were more of shock instead of amazement.
What's he shocked about? What is he trying to hide?
With her questions, Audrey greeted her parents and brother and the people that gathered over with a faint smile. Seeing Miss Justice no longer paying attention to him, Klein secretly heaved a sigh of relief as he began thinking.
I need to be careful later and play the role of Dwayne Dantes well. I mustn't let a spectator notice any problems. Regardless of whether Miss Justice noticed it or not, I've already thought of the excuse for my abnormal reaction. Miss Justice is indeed a lady from a powerful, aristocratic family. I wonder what her last name is exactly. I'll ask Macht or Bishop Electra later.
Amidst his thoughts, Klein frowned slightly, having a nagging feeling that he was being watched. Following his spiritual intuition, he swept his gaze towards the door. Nuss. Outside the door, in the shadows, there was a golden retriever sitting there silently. Chapter 864. Actor and Spectator. When the ghostly gaze of the golden retriever pierced through the curtains from the shadows, Klein's brows indiscernibly twitched as he failed to hide his alarm. He then naturally shifted his gaze away and looked towards Miss Justice and company.
How terrifying. Why is that dog sitting in the corner, hiding in the shadows for no good reason? It was silently looking at everyone in the hall. Miss Justice seems to have fed a spectator potion to an animal and had once asked Mr. Hanged Man for advice. Don't tell me it's that golden retriever. 2 spectators, one out in the open and one in the dark. Which actor can handle that? In high society, Miss Justice and the dog are unlikely to be the only spectators. Her joining the psychology alchemists was a result of other nobles as well. It seems like it was done by Duchess Negan's sister.
As Klein lampooned and analyzed, he walked to Macht's family and asked in a seemingly casual manner,
The ones who just entered seem to be very noble people.
Macht glanced Dwayne Dantes and chuckled.
Eastchester Earl's family. You can directly call him Earl Hall. You should have heard of him. That's his wife, Ma'am Caitlin. That's his eldest son, Lord Hibbert. You should have already met him.
Upon hearing Macht's introduction, Klein suddenly broke out into a cold sweat. This was because he had indeed met Hibbert Hall at the ball Macht had hosted. However, he had failed to notice the Lord, or he wouldn't have raised the question.
I was shocked by Miss Justice's sudden appearance.
Klein maintained his smile and listening stance. Macht continued.
That's his daughter, Miss Audrey Hall. In the social scene over the past 2 years, she has the title of being the most stunning gem in Backland. It's very apt, isn't it?
Without waiting for Dwayne Dantes' reply, he minced his words by saying,
She is courted by princes, duke heirs, and many honorable excellencies and gentlemen.
Macht's concealed meaning was clear. He was saying to this man, one who liked all kinds of women, not to place his sights on the lady. She was a target he had no thoughts of making contact with. As for Klein, he was having other thoughts.
So Miss Justice is Earl Hall's daughter. It's no wonder she's so rich. It's no wonder she's never bargained. Earl Hall is one of the top bankers in the kingdom. He's the most influential member of Parliament of the House of Lords and one of the hereditary peerage. His wealth is much more than Baron Sindris. Even if Miss Justice is unable to inherit the aristocratic title and family estate, the wealth she will inherit will be at least £100,000. With her looks, birth, and character, she is indeed the best choice for a marriage partner with the royal family or powerful nobles. However, the way she has been repeatedly buying mystical items doesn't look like she's someone with a wealth of only a few £100,000. She's able to claim it from her father. I also wish to have one like that.
Amidst his racing thoughts, Klein replied to Macht's warning with a smile.
I've heard of the various rumors about Miss Audrey. It's only today that I have realized that they aren't that exaggerated. Unfortunately, I'm not a prince or the heir to a duke, marquis, viscount, or earl. Otherwise, I would also be one of her pursuers.
He was implying that he knew his status and standing. Mock didn't continue the topic and began introducing the various guests he knew to Duane Dantes. He had truly led him into high society. Of course, the greatest supporter involved in this was the Church of Evernight. Without the charity party they held for the foundation, Mock wouldn't have the chance to bring Duane Dantes to meet so many honorable people. Marquis Losant, Earl Gross, Viscount Loveland. The aristocratic believers of the goddess separately exchanged pleasantries with Duane Dantes with a rather genial attitude. Before Mock was done with the introductions, an elder walked into the hall. He was wearing a black clergyman robe with red accents. By his chest hung 5 dark sacred emblems. He was clean-shaven, and his eyes were deep, dark, and tranquil. Including Earl Hall, everyone turned to face the elder and respectfully bowed.
Good evening, Your Grace.
This elder was none other than St. Anthony Stevenson, one of the 13 archbishops of the Church of Evernight. He was the person in charge of the Backlund Diocese, and he was part of the upper echelons of the church in the true sense of the word. When Klein saw the archbishop, his body and mind involuntarily trembled as he found it difficult to hide it. It was as though he stumbled upon a grave on an unlit village trail back when he was young. He swept his gaze and saw that the other guests didn't have any strong reactions. He immediately realized that the horror which St. Anthony carried with him was more clearly felt by people with stronger spirituality. He hurriedly entered cogitation in an attempt to calm himself down. When he managed to control his trembling, St. Anthony had already smiled. He surveyed the area and tapped his chest 4 times in a clockwise fashion.
Praise the Lady. Praise the Lady.
The guests at the charity party replied one after another. With the archbishop's arrival, Mock stopped introducing Klein to the other guests because the party had officially begun. According to convention, everyone would take their seats and piously pray to the goddess for 3 minutes. Following that, the cathedral would begin singing and walk to the baldachin and use their ethereal, uniform, and seemingly cathartic voices to praise the goddess. After the religious ritual ended, Electra received St. Anthony's instructions to stand to the side of the choir. There was a podium there, with all kinds of books placed on it.
Everyone, I'd like to thank you all for coming. Your character is a resplendent star in the serene night.
Electra first said a few words of pleasantries before saying,
Our establishment of a bursary foundation that targets the poor stems from Mr. Duane Dantes' suggestion. He is truly an honorable gentleman. His piousness and character are impeccable and a definite role model to others. Next, I'd like to invite Mr. Duane Dantes to give everyone a brief speech.
Although Klein was already prepared, he drew a gasp inwardly when he heard the last sentence.
This was different from usual. There were 2 or even more spectators around. It wasn't something that he could bullshit through if he wanted to. The content of his speech needed to be sufficiently realistic, without them being able to see through his lies or fake examples.
Pressing down his clothes at his abdomen, he quickly stood up and walked to the podium as he buttoned his suit. Coming behind the podium and steadying himself, he surveyed the nobles, members of parliament, clergymen, and high-ranking civil servants. He said with a smile,
I'm a little nervous. This is my first time being stared at by so many people of such honorable standing. I was once active in a region where the poor gathered. I was active in the chaotic southern continent and, thus, saw many things. There was a young lady who helped her mother make pasted matchboxes from the age of 6. If she didn't do that, they wouldn't even have the money to buy rye bread after paying rent. The rye bread they eat is filled with mill feed, and occasionally they will buy it into gravel or rocks. The hardness make it usable as a rod to attack others. When this girl gradually grew up, although she led a laborious daily life, and her family lacked any additional funds, she still looked forward to the night schools run by the church. She wished to study how to read in order to grasp knowledge. This is because she knew that only by doing so could she stop living the way she did. Only by doing so would she not starve and be able to wear clothes that could really protect her from the cold. She wouldn't need to work at factories with harsh conditions and end up dying in her 20s.
Klein had selected a portion of the experiences of the poor kids he had met before, merging them together as he conveyed them with his true feelings. He could clearly see many ladies more or less reveal looks of empathy. A number of girls even had their eyes flicker, such as Audrey Hall.
She really is an easily moved child. I've acted from the bottom of my heart. I've even moved myself, much less a spectator. However, most gentlemen aren't moved. Some of them seem to already be aware of the situations of the poor. Some do not mind those of the lower class.
Klein swept his gaze as he continued.
Our industry has been developing. In the future, we will definitely need more literate workers. Our election criteria has been relaxed. In the future, the ones who are eligible to vote will definitely include most of the educated. With the empathy towards these poor children and my expectations of the kingdom's future, I've decided to donate all my Coin Company shares that I have on hand to establish a bursary foundation that targets the poor. It lets them have the opportunity to enter official institutes of higher learning after attending the free night classes.
Earl Hall, male, who had a beautiful mustache, nodded when he heard that. He was the first to raise his hands to gently clap. Amidst the vigorous applause, Klein returned to the seat belonging to him. Bishop Electra headed up and announced,
The shares that Mr. Dwayne Dantes donated are valued at £15,000. We would use it to establish a Lowen Charity Bursary Foundation. Ladies and gentlemen, if you agree with him and pity those children who thirst for knowledge, you can contribute to this foundation.
As he spoke, he pointed at the donation box beside him. Audrey retracted her gaze and pressed the corner of her eye and said to her father,
Father, I plan on donating £1,000. What about you?
As she spoke, her mind quickly summarized what she had observed.
Dwayne Dantes has likely lived a lower-class life. His pity, empathy, and speech were all very realistic. Those poor children are truly pitiful. Just now, when the bishop mentioned that the shares were valued at £15,000, the corners of his lips twitched unnaturally. From the looks of it, he likely feels the pinch over donating the money. However, the sincerity of him donating it doesn't seem fake. This means that he's a gentleman who loves money, but he loves kindness even more. Why was he shocked when he saw me, and what is he hiding? He has seen me somewhere before but doesn't know my identity? But there's no need to hide that. He identified my necklace as a mystical item, so he was shocked before trying to attempt to hide this matter? If that's the case, it means that he's definitely a beyonder, one that isn't a low-sequence beyonder. I'll ask Susie later when I'm back. Perhaps she noticed other details. She was hiding in the darkness, so he wouldn't be on his guard against her, allowing her to discover more.
Amidst her thoughts, Audrey saw her father smile as he took out a checkbook and fountain pen. The value he wrote down was £10,000. Chapter 865, Earl Hall's Suggestion. £10,000. Audrey blinked as she used a very slight change in expression to express her surprise. Without needing her to voice out her question, Earl Hall had noticed her puzzlement. He chuckled and said,
This is an insightful man. His ideas have inspired me and resonated with me. Besides, we can't ignore the misery that objectively exists just because it cannot be resolved anytime soon.
Audrey vaguely understood her father, but she felt that she didn't fully understand him. She nodded slightly and took out her checkbook from her purse that matched her dress and wrote down the £1,000 value. This was a charity ball. Furthermore, it was held in a side hall of the cathedral, so there weren't any dances or extravagant arrangements. There weren't any valets or ladies' maids following by their sides. It was simply a charity event that had some degree of donations involved. The ladies undoubtedly brought their bags on them. The guests subsequently threw their checks into the donation box and headed for the two long tables for some beverages or simple food, after which they walked around the hall socializing instead of sitting. This was closer to that of a buffet party. Klein also accompanied Electra and came to St. Anthony's side and was introduced to him. St. Anthony smiled in response to Dwayne Dantes's greeting. He sized him up and said,
Very good. We are proud to have a believer like you. who irreasonably shot a statue b'shach that has taught us that character is more important than status. Therefore, you are an extremely honorable gentleman.
To be frank, faced with this saint, Klein's heart was drumming because deities or beyonders related to the fate domain was able to see the gray fog's aura on him. For example, everyone from the monster pathway or the Evernight goddess who wielded the authority of misfortune. As for St. Anthony, if he was a high-sequence beyonder of the sleepless pathway and grasped beyonder powers involving misfortune, then there was a chance that he could see that there was a problem with Duane Dantes. As such, Klein had headed above the gray fog to divine so before attending the charity party. He received the answer that there wasn't any danger. Since the goddess didn't say anything, even if her archbishop were to discover some problems, he will probably feign ignorance. Klein replied with a warm smile,
I've been to the cathedral frequently to pray and listen to Bishop Elector's preachings in recent times. Even my soul seems to have been cleansed. Therefore, I abided by the goddess's teachings to pass such beauty and hope to others.
St. Anthony nodded and said,
In front of the goddess, all believers are differentiated by their character, regardless if they are nobles or commoners, male or female. They are all the same. I hope those people who live in poor environments will liberate themselves of fear and receive serenity. Praise the Lady.
Klein and Electra tapped their chests 4 times in a clockwise fashion.
Praise the Lady.
Seeing St. Anthony turn towards the other believers, Klein planned on heading over to the table to get a glass of champagne to quench his thirst. At this moment, he saw a gentleman approach him. This man had somewhat loose skin with an obvious potbelly. However, it could be seen that he was rather handsome in his youth. Even now, his blue eyes that had a smile on them and his beautiful mustache made him appear good-looking. Klein had previously learned from Mock's introduction and knew he was the House of Lords Member of Parliament and powerful banker Earl Hall. Of course, to him, the most important identity of this noble was that he was Miss Justice's father. And Audrey happened to be by his side. She was observing Duane Dantes with her bright eyes, awaiting her conversation with the gentleman later. This made Klein immediately feel a little uncomfortable.
I need to present the persona that matches Duane Dantes. A person of ordinary birth who's working hard to get himself into high society. At this moment, he's bound to be a little nervous and restrained. Likewise, a gentleman who loves beautiful women will feel the same feelings when faced with the most stunning gem in Backlund's eyes. But he will also unknowingly showcase his own breadth of knowledge and show his charms to express his desire. Yes, an experienced tycoon who survived the chaos must be someone who has pride and confidence hidden in him. No matter what he faces, he will try his best to appear calm, respectful, but not sycophantic.
Klein's thoughts raced as he smiled and politely said to the approaching Earl Hall,
Honorable Earl, I happen to see the check you donated. Your kindness and generosity truly impresses me. Yet you've never flaunted that, or informed others how much you've donated.
Earl Hall chuckled.
No, compared to you, the price I pay is far inferior to what you made.
Between the lines, he meant that £15,000 might be a tenth of Duane Dantes' overall wealth, or even a fifth. But £10,000 to him was just a thousandth or even lesser. Clearly, the former paid a greater price, and his willingness to do was even more pure.
From my point of view, as long as the poor who yearn to use knowledge to change their fates can be helped, all donations are kind and sufficiently benevolent. From this angle, the only difference between £10,000 and £15,000 is just £5,000.
Klein tried hard to express his sincerity as he deliberately glanced at the listening blonde girl without leaving a trace. He knew that an ordinary without a trace was obvious in the eyes of a spectator. Audrey wore a faint smile as she silently listened to her father's and Duane Dantes' conversation, as though she hadn't noticed the gentleman peek at her. This made Klein lack confidence from his failure at receiving any feedback in his performance. VA. Earl Hall laughed and said,
Then we shall agree to disagree. This isn't anything bad. At the very least, we are praising one another. I can tell that you once had a difficult period, and had once led the life of the poor.
Klein nodded and said,
I do not avoid such a past, They are my valuable riches.
Earl Hall commented with a smile.
And this is something me and my friends lack. And it's because of this that you possess a unique and wise point of view. I hope there will be opportunities in the future to work with you.
That is also something I look forward to.
Klein replied with a suitable level of sincerity. However, Earl Hall pointed to the side and said,
A couple of friends are waiting for me. I hope that your charitable ways and wealth keep increasing.
Klein didn't drag on the conversation as he drew the crimson moon on his chest.
Praise the lady.
Praise the lady.
Earl Hall and Audrey tapped their chests in a clockwise fashion in unison. Watching them walk past him and in another direction, Klein secretly heaved a sigh of relief. Suddenly, he tensed up as he naturally looked around the hall and noticed the shadow at the door. Silently sitting there was the golden retriever. On the carriage back to Empress Borough, Earl Hall, who looked like he was resting with his eyes closed, looked at his daughter and said,
Audrey, didn't you mention that you wish to join one of the church's charitable organizations? Are you interested in joining this bursary foundation?
Audrey had already sensed that her father might have such thoughts back in the cathedral, so she expressed the appropriate level of surprise and confusion.
It's only a small charity foundation.
Audrey's brother, Hibbert Hall, argued for his sister. Earl Hall shook his head and laughed.
I've asked a few bishops. The total amount of donations tonight has already reached £100,000. Why do you think there's so much?
Hibbert frowned slightly as he said in thought.
They were bribed?
At the same time, Audrey gave her own point of view.
Knowledge and the relaxing of the electoral qualifications?
Earl Hall nodded and sighed.
Nothing is an essential existence, including humans themselves as well as the nobility.
He then looked at Audrey and said with a smile,
There's no need to force yourself. I can get others to join the Bursary Foundation. I just wish that you will gain more knowledge because of this, and now view certain matters as definite and immutable. Even if you miss this, there will be other charity organizations.
Father, I'll consider it.
Audrey replied seriously. After hearing Duane Dantes' recount of the stories of the poor, she had already decided on joining to gather more donations, to contact the government, and organize events to contribute her efforts to the cause. She was hesitant because she felt that the middle-aged man was a little problematic. After returning home, Audrey immediately brought Susie to her room and closed the door.
What's your take on that Mr. Duane Dantes?
Audrey asked directly. The golden retriever sat opposite her and thought,
He seems to know you or something on you. Also, a lot of the time, he's acting and leaving a certain degree of clues. He seemed to be guarded against me. He's extremely sharp.
Yes, I noticed it too. He might be a beyonder. He acted very well, but it's still an act. However, this is also very ordinary. At a social event, and faced with different people, we would all play different roles and engage in a corresponding act.
Audrey said in thought,
The biggest problem stems from his shock when he saw me. He was almost horrified. Also, he was embroiled in 2 cases, one after another, especially with that case regarding Baron Sindress. It seems to have some beyonder elements involved in it, with signs of someone being cued to do so.
Susie gaped her mouth, unable to give a definitive explanation. All she could do was woof. Audrey began another train of thought.
I'll get someone to investigate Duane Dantes, and after confirming that there aren't any major problems, I'll join the Bursary Foundation. All right, it's almost Monday. I can request Fours and Mr. Moon. They're both in Backland.
Monday afternoon at 3. Dark red beams shot up in the Grand Palace, materializing into blurry figures. Audrey quickly surveyed the area and looked to the seat of honor at the bronze, long table and bowed with a smile.
Good afternoon, Mr. Fool Tilde.